And the books are for sale. We've got the paperback copies here. And we are just delighted to have Tommy and Alix with us tonight to talk about the book and answer any questions you have. So, turn it over to you, Tommy.
Thank you, Connie. Yeah. Just to add one thing to like, yeah, that's what I'm talking about there. Just to add one thing to what Colleen said, several of the folks in the audience tonight are members of Joanne's book group, which met for many years here and was one of her great joys in life. So special thanks to all y'all who are in the book group. So let's talk dogs for a little bit. I'll do that, and then take questions about dogs or whatever else you want to talk about, and then we'll sign some books later on. It looks like we have some dog cookies over there. So that's just hold out for the treats, which is a very dog-like thing to do, right? I want to talk a little bit about kind of how this book came to be. It starts really kind of simply. One night I'm at home watching TV, folding laundry, and you know how it is when you're doing a chore, sometimes the TV's just on in the background, you're not really paying attention to it. Well, that particular night there was a dog show, and I was kind of semi-watching it and semi-paying attention to other stuff. All of a sudden this question just popped into my head out of nowhere. Are those dogs happy? And the more I thought about it, the more I thought that was kind of an interesting question. Because even though at the time I knew very little about the dog show world, I did know that show dogs had different lives than just a regular household pet. I came to find out that from the time they are like 6 weeks old, a breeder will look at a litter of puppies and separate them into two piles. One, the puppies that are considered to be, might be able to be in a dog show one day, they have the physical traits to compete. Those dogs are called show quality. And the other puppies, purebred puppies, mind you, but they just have some little physical flaw or something like that. Those dogs are denigrated with the term pet quality. They're just pets. And from that moment, those dogs that are deemed to be show quality are fed differently, they're housed differently, they're obviously trained differently, they're often taken around the country in RVs and vans from place to place, kind of like deadheads from town to town. And they just lead very different lives than what the household pets that you and I might have ever lead. And so I thought that was kind of interesting. It was in their folding socks or whatever. And then I had a second thought. We know the regular pets that we have, the ones that just kind of hang around with us. Are they happy? They sure seem to be happy, right? But they don't get to choose where they live. They generally don't get to choose what they eat unless they grab a chunk of ham off the counter. They don't get to choose who they mate with, and often, if they ever get to mate at all. They don't have what sociologists and people like that call agency, the thing that you and I might just call freedom. They don't have a lot of freedom in their lives. And so, why do those dogs seem so awful happy to see us? Why do they run to the door when we come home from work or the grocery store or wherever? Why do they pine away for us when we're gone? Is it just some con they've been running all these years to get trains out of us? Or is there something deeper going on there? And why is it that many of us feel such joy when we're around dogs, around our dogs, and cuddle up next to our dogs. Well, those are two pretty good questions to think about on a laundry night. So, and they lasted beyond that. They sort of itched in the back of my head. And during my career as a journalist and author, I've learned to pay attention. So I can't quite let go of some thought or some idea. And so after a while, I decided to try to pursue it as a book. And that's how I ended up with that book on the table over there. It's called Dogland. Love, Glory, and Slumber in the Westminster Dog Show. Now, I'd say the book is kind of in two parts. They kind of alternate a little bit back and forth during the book. The first part is about the world of dog shows, and especially Westminster, which is kind of the Super Bowl of the dog show. I went in, as I said, knowing very little or nothing about it, and I sort of plunged into it, trying to learn as I go, dove into the deep end. One thing I learned very quickly that kind of startled me, and I deal with this in the book, is I was not prepared for how easily and often people in the dog show world use the word bitch. They say it all the time. It doesn't mean what it means when you and I are maybe talking about somebody outside their presence. In the dog show world, it's just a female dog. And so I had to get used to the PA system in the dog show going, where all the golden retriever bitches report to room 6. That was not something I was used to. But there were lots of other things that I wasn't used to. I wasn't used to the chaos of the typical dog show. At big dog shows like Westminster, there are 2,000 dogs there. Cars fill in the parking lot, and dogs and their handlers, groomers, all the other kind of entourage around these dogs, filling these big convention centers or civic arenas, or wherever they have these dog shows. What you see on TV, if you watch the dog show, is kind of carefully choreographed. These dogs are led around the ring by handlers who are immaculately dressed, and the judges are often in tuxedos and that sort of thing. And it's all choreographed dance that there's a long tradition of hundreds of years of dog shows behind. But if you go behind the curtain, as it were, it's mayhem. There's dogs getting groomed and like fur flying and nails flying, and it smells like wet dog and shampoo, and dogs are being let to pee off urgently. They often have these little pens with like wood shavings, and then they take the dogs to do their business. It's just chaotic back there. And it took me a long time to sort of get used to that as well. Dog shows are a subculture, and they're evolving. And I love writing about subcultures. Each of you in this room probably belongs to a subculture or two, even though you might not think that. If you're like a NASCAR, or if you're a knitter, or if you collect garden gnomes, or whatever it is that you may think of as just a hobby or a pursuit or something you do with friends, that subculture has its own etiquette, its own language, its own rules and regulations, and its own insiders and outsiders. And depending on the subculture, sometimes people on the inside don't like very much people from the outside come in. And I have to say that for me, coming into the dog show world, I did feel a little bit of that. People for the dog show world, some of them felt a little burned by the movie Best in Show. I don't know if anybody ever saw that.
Yeah.
It's a mockumentary, a fake documentary that sort of made fun of the dog show world. I feel like in a loving way. And there's a lot of accuracy in it. There's a lot of real dog show people in the movie. But they do poke fun at that world. And that's still a sore spot for some people getting dog shows, even though that movie came out 25 years ago. So as I dipped my toe into this world, I had to pay attention to people who welcomed me as an outsider, as opposed to people who sort of tried to push me away as an outsider. And what I was looking to do when I started all this was, first of all, learn as much as I could. But secondly, I was looking for one dog and one dog handler to sort of be the thread that pulled this whole book together. I was looking for a dog that I knew would be a contender at the Westminster Dog Show, because my idea was to take a dog and their handler through the kind of preliminaries to show you, the reader, what it's like to do all this stuff, and then get to the bright lights of Westminster and hopefully have a dog that did really well. And so I was kind of auditioning dogs and their handlers as I went through this. Then it took about a good 6 months for me to kind of sort all this out. I started by trying to figure out the kind of the top dogs in the country. There's some trade magazines that publish every week a list of the top 100 show dogs in America. It's kind of like the Billboard Hot 100 hits, that sort of thing. And so by looking at that chart week after week after week, I saw some dogs that kept showing up. And I started following those dogs as I went to dog shows around the country. And as I did that, I would then go and talk to their handlers and see how I got along with them. Sit down and talk to them about their lives. And then I probably started with a dozen or so. And a couple of times at each dog show, I managed to get a couple of those folks off to the side and talk to them a little bit, get to know them, explain to them what I was trying to do. And so I finally had pretty long interviews with about a dozen dog handlers. Some of them just weren't interested in what I was doing. They were the types who weren't fond of outsiders coming in, and they didn't want to participate. There were others who were kind of curious about what I was doing, but they just didn't have enough time. One of the many things I learned about dog handlers is that on a given weekend, they might be showing 15 or 20 dogs in one show. And so a lot of their lives are very hectic during dog show weekends, and many of them just didn't feel like they had time. 2 or 3 had the time, were interested, but I just didn't feel like we clicked. I didn't feel like we could have long conversations over a long period of time and sustain those. It's kind of like a first date, right? After a while, we just don't quite click. But then I met Laura King and her dog, Striker. So I'll tell you about the dog first. Striker is a Samoyed. That's what we would call it. In the dog show world, they say Samoyed, because that's closer to the original Russian. And whenever dog show people can say something more fancy than normal, they do. As those Samoyeds to them, Samoyeds to us. Samoyeds come from Siberia. They're a cousin to the Siberian Husky. Most of you probably know kind of what a Siberian Husky looks like. The difference is that a Samoyed is pure white, except for black eyes, nose, lips, and paws. looked like a walking snowbank, just these spectacularly beautiful dogs. And Striker was the best Samoyed probably in the history of the breed. By the time I met him, he had won more than 100 dog shows across the country. He was one of the very top show dogs. And so I knew that if I hung out with Striker, I would have a good shot at being with a dog that was going to make it to the final round, the best in show round in Westminster. Part of me tried to figure out early on how he stood out. Because especially when they first judge dogs, they judge them by breed. And so I would see Striker with like 30 Samoyeds, and to me they all looked alike. I was like, how the heck do you tell the difference? There are subtle differences physically that a dog show judge can tell. But there are also differences in temperament and personality. And the thing I noticed about Striker, more than the rest of the dogs, was his sort of zen-like stillness. He was a chill dog. In a world that can often be very hectic, lots of other dogs running around, lots of people running around, he seemed to be able to tune all that out. It reminded me of an interview I read years and years ago with an old basketball coach named Al McGuire. Al McGuire said one time that he didn't want his point guards to be too smart, because if they were, they'd be hyper aware of everything around them. They'd be in a big game and they'd notice the smell of the popcorn, and they'd see the cheerleaders over in the corner or whatever. Now, I don't want to say Striker wasn't smart, but I will say he'd have made a heck of a point guard. He seemed to have that ability to tune out the things around him. And as I watched him and watched his handler, Laura King, I saw how well they got along and how in tune they were with each other. And as I met Laura, I found somebody who was destined to be in this world. She literally learned to walk by holding the family dog's tail. It's being in the dog show world is all she ever wanted to do. And except for one miserable year as an accountant, dog shows are all she's ever done. And now she's one of the most sought after handlers in the country. People pay her big money to show their dogs. I guess that's one detail I should mention, and I can talk about more if you'd like me to. Often at the top level of dog shows, the person who's handling the dog is not the person who owns the dog. The dog owner will lend out this dog to the handler for sometimes years as this dog goes through the smaller shows and up to the championship level. So Laura's coveted in the breeds that she's good at, and then pretty much any other breed too. She, like other top handlers, shows some dogs just for like a weekend at a time. She's going through Kansas City. There's somebody in Kansas City has a dog they want her to show. She does that and they never see each other. Well, there's some dogs that some owners are considering putting into the dog show world more completely. And they might turn her over to Laura, turn the dog over to Laura for a month or so that they see how well they get along. But Striker was special. Striker already had won many dog shows before he and Laura ever met. And everybody involved in this transaction knew that Striker was a good enough dog to win it all. And so from the moment they got together, Laura made it her business to be Striker's special person. She got him out of his kennel every day. She watered him. She fed him. She groomed him. She bathed him. She trained him. She ran him around. She played with him. And she was the one who put him to bed at night. That was a treatment that most of the other dogs at their kennel did not get. But it was meant to build a bond here where they're just a person and a dog hanging out their kennel in Illinois that Laura hoped would come to pay off under the bright lights in the ring in New York and Westminster. So that's sort of half of the book, is following Laura and Stryker through this relationship that they built together. So you learn a little bit about the history of the dog show world, how it works, all the craziness that's part of it. And you get to Westminster with Laura and Stryker. And I hope by the time you get there, you're rooting for them as they make it to the big stage. So, the other part of the book is kind of even the bigger picture of this relationship that humans and dogs have built over a period of, best guess by science, about 30,000 years. Nobody, of course, knows what had happened. The cave people were not kind enough to leave us drawings that showed how this developed. Best guess is that in the humans' nomadic days, when we went from place to place every day, hunting, killing game, at the end of the day building a fire and cooking it, that drew the attention of gray wolves. Gray wolves who have been around even longer than us at that point. I'm going to condense a lot of time into a few sentences here. These wolves got closer to the fire. Humans maybe threw bones out in the bushes. Wolves gnawed at these bones. They realized they had something good going. They followed these humans from campsite to campsite every day. And at some point, after who knows how many years, one of those wolves curled up next to the fire. One of those early human beings reached down and rubbed its belly, and that was the first dog. Every dog that has ever existed since, from the tiniest little teacup chihuahua to the biggest Neapolitan Mastiff, are the descendants of those gray wolves. And the reason there are so many varieties of dogs, more than 200 purebreds recognized by the American Kennel Club, plus the massive number of golden doodles and labradoodles and mixes of any kind, and then the basically infinite variety of mutts. The reason there are so many types of dog and varieties of dog is because we molded them to do the jobs that we needed them to do. Over thousands and thousands of years, we have bred dogs. They are one of our first and maybe our all-time best utility tool. Dogs could pull things that we couldn't pull. Dogs could chase down things that we couldn't catch. Dogs could protect us from predators. And dogs could do just about anything we needed them to do. It's sort of given among scientists that dogs are the first animal that humans ever domesticated. But I think there's also a pretty good case to be made that they domesticated us. And that without dogs, the evolutionary steps that we made to moved from our nomadic life into agriculture, into villages, and then into towns and cities and libraries with air conditioning and a dry place to be on a rainy night. We may have gotten there without dogs, but it would have been a lot bumpier road. They helped us in so many ways along the way. And then, in a sort of drastic change of plans, we asked them to do completely different things. They're still working dogs now on farms and garden junkyards and all that sort of thing. But most dogs now, especially in the US, I consider them to kind of all be therapy dogs. They're the dogs that hang out with us on the porch while we're watching the sunset. They're the dogs that are sounding boards late at night when maybe we don't have anybody else to talk to. There are walk-in buddies. They're the ones who keep squirrels off our lawns. They let us know when the mailman's coming. They are our protectors, our friends, our companions, are the things that often keep us warm at night. I think it's pretty amazing, especially these big dogs that we ask, in some cases, to be pretty vicious animals, have now adapted to become like the cuddle buddies that like curl up next to us on the couch. That's not what we bred these pit bulls to do, but they do. And they do it willingly and they do it happily. And they're happy to do it, and they make us happy to do it. So much so that there are experiments that scientists have done with dogs and people, especially dogs that know particular people. All they have to do is look at each other, and a pleasure hormone gets released in the person and the dog. Just think how amazing that is. That these dogs that we asked to do all these blue-collar, arduous tasks thousands of years ago, now are so happy to see us that their brains light up with chemicals that make them happy. How did that happen? Why did it happen? And what meaning do we get out of it? Going back to that original question, are those dogs happy? Well, not only are those dogs happy, not only that's the question for them, it's a question for us. Why are we so happy to see them? And how is it that over these thousands and thousands of years, we've developed this relationship that's closer with any other animal, and maybe the closest relationship between any two animals that exist, any two species. That's what the other half of the book is about. And as I was searching around in the early days of thinking about all this, I was kind of lost, because I knew I had these two halves, and I knew they were kind of interesting on their own. I wasn't quite sure how they fit together. And early on any project, for me, I feel sort of in the wilderness, when I don't know stuff. And I know I've done this long enough now, that I know eventually I will get my way out of the woods. But that doesn't mean it's any more pleasing to be in the woods. And so I've been doing this about 6 months. I've been kind of reporting this book. And I was still pretty lost. And I was at the National Dog Show outside Philadelphia. That's the one that they show on Thanksgiving Day at the Macy's Parade. So it's in this gigantic, immense convention center that's the size of like 10 football fields. And I just wandered around this thing, totally bewildered. Still. And I thought to myself, you know what? I just need a break. I just need to take a rest, kind of get my bearings, figure out what I'm going to do. So I was wandering around, and I came to an empty showroom. So these rings are basically just, you know, those little dividers I use in, like between the aisles of the bank or the theater or something. Those little, what used to be velvet ropes, they split in. A dog show ring is just those laid out in a rectangle usually. And then they put folding chairs around for spectators. So I came up to one of these empty rings and sat down and got out my notebook and just sort of kind of downloaded the stuff I'd been seeing. As I'm doing this, I felt this pressure under my left arm. And I have to tell you, I wrote a book about life in Overbeck County. And since that book, I've lost about 100 pounds. But I'm still a big guy. And when you're my size, and when you're my age, you feel pressure under your left arm. I thought, am I going to die of a heart attack at this stupid dog show without even having written this book? But it didn't feel quite right. And I glanced down, and I happened to see, under the crook of my arm, this snout. And I slowly turned, and I saw that the snout belonged to a Bernese mountain dog. They saw these beautiful big dogs, get up to be 120, 130 pounds. Just these big, lovable, galoot dogs, who was attached to a kind of nervous-looking handler. She was not expecting this moment. One thing they tell you right away in dog shows is, don't pet the dogs unless you get permission. For two reasons. One, it's just kind of rude to ask anybody to pet their dog without permission. And the second thing is, these dogs are groomed to within an inch of their lives. So you basically don't want to mess up their fur. So I turned around slowly, kind of looked at the handler and said, is this okay? And she said, yeah, we don't have to be anywhere right now, it's all right. So I turned back around, and by this time, this dog, this immense dog, had rested its chin on my lap. And so for just a minute or so, probably less time it's taking for me to tell the story, it's probably less time than it actually took for this to happen. I just kind of rubbed this little dog, big dog for a minute, and just sat there. And we just quietly sort of were together. Then after a moment, it just slowly backed away, leaving a big trail of slime on my pants. and the handler went off to do its business. And later on, I realized that was the moment that I figured out what the book was about. It's about that connection between people who love dogs and the dogs themselves, people who work with dogs and the dogs they work with. And just sometimes, some random dog that just happens to know that you might need a little comfort, or you might need a little reassurance, and walks up behind you and gives it to you. How the hell do they know that? How did that happen? What did they get out of that moment? And what's like it? And what do we get out of it? And I hope, if you read my book, you'll find out my ideas anyway on what that's all about. All right, that's my speech. Thank you. So, I'll be happy to answer any questions anybody has about the book or anything else you want to talk about.
I've always been curious I know about the handlers at the shows, but in most cases, you already said that, they're not the owner of the dog, but there had to be a trainer in the middle. Is that usually the owner of the dog, or is that a separate person altogether?
That's a good question. He was asking about owners and handlers and trainers. That's what the handler is usually the trainer, at least at the kind of the top level. As well, some people have either take their dogs to other trainers first, and then it's usually not the owner. The owner often is just somebody who loves dogs and might have some experience training. But at the show dog level, they're hiring professionals to do all this. One thing that I was puzzled by early on in my research on this is sort of what the owners get out of this. Because you do not make money as a show dog owner. One thing that startled me, and I learned pretty quickly, the prize money for winning the Westminster Dog Show, which is the most prestigious dog show probably on earth, $0. You win nothing. You get a couple of big old ribbons, you get a couple of nice little trophies, and you get to be on the Good Morning America the next day. But you get no prize money. A few dog shows have prize money. The vast majority of them, the dog shows that you might have in Knoxville or Charlotte or places like that, you get a ribbon and a bag of dog food. That's the prize money. The owners are not in this for the money. Now, you do get some money for breeding as a show dog owner, but it's on an order of magnitude lower than like a horse breeder. Horse breeders who, if your horse wins the Kentucky Derby, you're going to make millions of dollars breeding that horse. If your dog wins Westminster, you might make thousands of dollars, but you may get rich. And in fact, most of the owners of the top show dogs go pretty deep into the hole. And at first, when I was researching this book, I couldn't believe that. I thought there's got to be something I'm missing. Like there's some back alley money that's going around. There's something I just don't understand. But to my knowledge, after 3 years of research, talking to a lot of people I trust, I just lose money. And so then the question becomes, well, why do they do that? And a lot of them, of course, just love dogs, love dog shows, love that whole world. But there are two other explanations that I thought made a lot of sense to me. One was what I call sort of the gifted child theory. So let's say you have an 8-year-old daughter who has just beaten the heck out of everybody in her age group and beyond in tennis. She's beaten the girls and the boys, she's beaten 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds, she's beaten everyone. One day somebody comes to you and says, you know, your daughter might be good enough to be a professional. She might win a medal. But to find out, you're probably going to have to send her to one of those academies down in Florida. It's going to cost a fortune. She's probably going to be miserable. She's going to get yelled at for years. By the end of that time, you'll probably know if she's good enough. And if she is good enough, then your financial worries are over permanently. Would you be willing to make that sacrifice? Some would not, others would. Some dog owners are willing to do that to see if their dog can make it to the top. The other theory I heard that I thought made some sense to me was to consider that dog as a piece of art. That dog, that particular show dog, is unique in the world. Nobody has it but you. In the same way that nobody else has the Mona Lisa, nobody else has nobody else has Michelangelo's David, nobody else has whatever piece of art you think about and love. It's yours and yours alone, that dog. You get to show it off, and people are envious of having it. And you might be the kind of person who likes having bragging rights. And then at the end of the day, when its career is over, you get to bring it home with you and enjoy it at your pleasure. That is very appealing to some people, and they are willing to devote quite a bit of resources into that. And so it takes all kinds, right? What other questions do you have?
So you talked about the difference in a show dog versus a pet. Did you actually come to a conclusion which dog is happier?
I did. I hate to do this to you, but I kind of wish you'd read the book.
Okay. Okay, that's fair.
But I'll just kind of give you a general idea. I did conclude that yes, most dogs, except in some obvious bad situations, are happy. The reason they're happy, show dogs and just regular pets, is that they've learned how to make us happy. And learn better than any other creature on earth. And I think we have learned a lot from them. First of all, about what makes them happy. But second, about, in a bigger way, and I think this is where my book is leading in a bigger picture way, as to what kind of happiness means. And what it means for other people to make us happy. And for us to make other people happy. I think dogs have helped us figure that out, whether we're consciously doing it or not. We know what it takes to make other people happy. Our friends, the people we care about, the people we love. We don't always succeed. It's not always our fault. We don't make somebody else happy. But we kind of know how to do it. And I think we learned a lot of that from our relationship with dogs. And so I think that's where, through the journey of this book, that you end up, I hope, thinking about this bigger idea of what makes us happy. Not just how dogs treat us, but how the people we care about in our lives treat us. What is it that they do to bring us joy? And I think I have a pretty good working theory, probably not scientifically vetted, but one that I'm willing to go with, at least a philosophy of happiness that I think makes some sense. Yes, sir.
Do you own a dog, and if so, what kind or kinds?
We had a dog. There's a whole chapter in the book about a perfect yellow lab mutt that Alix and I had named Fred. We had Fred for almost 15 years, till about 7 years ago, I guess. And there's a chapter in the book about him, so you'll get to know him in this book. And I've had other dogs in my life as well. Certainly had friends, have been a sort of friend of dog in many, many ways. When Alix's mom came to live with us 5 years ago, part of the package was a cat. A feral kitten that their neighbor Judy, who some of y'all may know, who worked at a vet clinic, brought Joey in one day because Joey had asked for a kitten. And this kitten proceeded to just ruin our lives for months. When she brought him to live with us, we came to name him Jack Reacher. Jack Reacher, the hero of these books and the TV series now. We thought Jack Reacher is known for being relentless and violent, and that's what this kitten was. For months, and I am not exaggerating when I say this, for months, every night at about 4 in the morning, he would just start howling and pounding the door just around the corner from our bedroom until either Alix or I would would get up and go tend to whatever it is he wanted, mostly just attention. Alix's mom had hearing aids that she took out. Alix totally slept through every night of this. So Alix and I would take turns getting up. And I can't tell you, I'm ashamed to tell you how many nights that I thought, you know, I could just leave the back door open. and I would, you know, beg forgiveness the next day for my tragic error. And he could, feral kidney could probably fend for themselves. But I didn't do it, and Alix didn't do it either. And over time, you know, he's lived with us 5+ years now. Thanks to, I guess, aging and the miracle of Prozac, Kitty Prozac, it was either him or us. He has known and has become what I am astonished to admit is now a good cat. But having said that, we're not about to bring a dog in the house and like upset that balance that we have so carefully generated over the years. If and when Jack would leave us, I would hope that we would start looking at it again. We're lucky to live in a neighborhood that's walkable, and we have a front porch that's pretty close to the street. And so we get a parade of dogs that come up and down our street every day, and we live vicariously through those every day. And so did Joanne when she lived with us. The dogs came to see her more than us. So, who else? What else would I like to talk about? Yes, you first.
When you said you were talking to the professional handlers mostly, did you try and reach out to any of the breeder owner handlers who had top running dogs?
I did. I met some of those too. And that's a good point. So at smaller dog shows, but then also even at the biggest ones, there are people who do the whole thing. They breed the dogs, they own the dogs, they graze the dogs, train them, and then handle them in dog shows. So there are owner handlers, there are breeder owner handlers, there are many different combinations of these. And I think, I'm trying to remember, was it the Bloodhound you won a couple of years ago? That was a breeder owner handler. I don't remember, but those people do unbelievable amounts of work to get their dogs up to the level of the highest shows. If you go to a smaller show, you'll find that many, if not most of the people, fit that category in one way or another. Those people are doing the Lord's work, you know, to take their dog around in their truck every week to 10 or 15 shows a year.
So it's like a full-time job.
It can be, certainly. And some people make it that. For the professional handlers, it's definitely a full-time job. Some of them 48, 50 weeks a year, they're on the road in their RVs. Laura and her partner, Robin, who's also a handler, they had an RV at the time. I think they've upgraded now. But they had an RV called Betty White. First because it was white, and second because Betty White was famously known for her devotion to animal dogs, especially dogs. And so they rode around the country in Betty White. And if you go to a dog show, especially a big one, it's kind of like the parking lot at a NASCAR race. It's full of RVs and, you know, modified buses. And, yeah, and that's, people go week to week just around the country. I think I described it in the book as like deadheads, except instead of like LSD and falafel, it's Big Macs and a box of wine. So that's just their, you know, at that level. And at every show, you'll see people who are doing this professionally, people around everywhere week to week to week. But then at every show, there will be people who are doing it as kind of a part-time thing, as a small thing. But that's still, while they're doing it, an awful lot of work.
Yeah, I was a breeder and a handler. But,
What breed?
Yeah, I actually had best breed of Westminster.
Oh, wow, congratulations.
That's a border collie. But the people that are making money are professional handlers.
Right.
And the people doing the advertising. Because to do well in the shows, you had to be constantly advertising so the judges would know who the dogs were. But the handlers, my dog was the #2 border collie in the country. The dog that was #1 had a handler. They were paying $20,000 a year to show the dog.
Yeah, too.
There's a lot of money is tied up in the advertising and the handlers.
Yeah, she brings up a good point about the advertising. So one of the things people ask me a lot as I was going into this is like, is the judging rigged in dog shows? And I would not say it's rigged. There's nobody, to my knowledge, giving out, envelopes of money in the back alley somewhere. But I will tell you, there's definitely a lot of nudging going on. And the nudging manifests itself mostly in these trade magazines in the dog show world. There are 3 big ones, and then each breed has its own magazine. There's big magazines. Print is not dead in the dog show world. There's a big, giant, glossy magazines that come out sometimes every week, 200, 250 pages, and they are jammed to the gills with advertisements. And so if you have a champion dog, you're going to put a big 2-page spread in these magazines. That's usually either 1 or 2 pictures. It's the handler and the dog like out in the field somewhere, like out of some romantic comedy, they're just like jogging through the daisies or something. Or, more to the point, it's at the winner's stand of a show that they might have won recently. In those photos is usually not just the dog and the handler, sometimes the owner, but also the judge. And so it's a little a shout out to the judge. And even if the judge is not in the photo, the ad always thanks the judge. And so this is, I consider it sort of subliminal advertising. The next time it doesn't have to be that judge. The next time a judge is in a ring looking at 35 Airedales and trying to figure out which one's the best, that judge might remember the Airedale that was in that magazine that some other judge loved. And I think the people in the dog show world spend a lot of money hoping that that judge remembers. And so that, to the extent that it's rigged or whatever, that's where they spend the money, is on that. The other way I would say it's not rigged, but it's slanted in a way, is that everybody who does this, and I'm sure you know it as well, they know what judges tend to favor. Judges at shows are often announced months ahead of time, so you know who the judges are going to be for your breed or whatever. And so people know that some judges like bigger dogs, some like smaller dogs, some like bitches and some like boy dogs, some like particular breeds and some don't like particular breeds, that sort of thing. And you can tailor, and in fact, people do tailor the shows they go to as to who might have the more favorable judge. As it gets to the bigger levels, obviously you have less choice in the matter. And so you're generally not pulling your dog out of Westminster because you have an unfavorable path. But at the smaller show, you're definitely. And so they have a book on judge. People have a book on judges the same way that NBA coaches have a book on referees. They know which ones are more likely to call fouls and which ones are more likely to let stuff go, which, ones are likely to call traveling, which ones not, that sort of thing. It's tendencies. It's not cheating, it's not bias, it's just natural human tendencies. And that's something else that people in the dog show will pay a lot of attention to. You had a question?
Yeah, I've come across this. We've had dogs all our lives, but I haven't read a lot about dog psychology and so forth. But I've come across this notion that sometimes that interprets dog behavior and their relationships to humans as in the context of a pack, a dog, a wolf pack or a dog pack. What do you think of that? How much of a relationship is between you and your dog, do you think has to do with the dog and being in relationship to leader of the pack or whatever.
I think there is something to that for sure. I think dogs have come to figure out in the modern world that their people are their pack. It's not probably the exact same relationship that dogs might have to a pack of other dogs, but it is that, relationship. Many dogs come obviously to protect their people. They're very good at protecting their people from others. Other dogs are wary of other people until their people show that these people are okay. Our dog, Fred, Yellow Lab, was always wary of a new person until one of us kind of made contact with him. We learned that a longtime friend of mine came to visit one time, and he and I were just, I'm sure we hugged as we came in the door, but Fred must have not been around when that happened. We sat on the couch and started catching up as we always do. And Fred sat in the next room just watching us very carefully. And then Alix came in. Alix said, "Oh, Virgil, you're here." She hugged him, and Fred trotted right over. It's like we gave him the signal, she gave him the signal by contact that this person was okay. Now, dogs often, of course, have the opposite signal. This person is here, I don't know him, I'm going to growl at him, or worse, until you show me that person. But I do think that it is part of the pack mentality. I don't know how much science there is backing it up. It's interesting, the study of people and dogs as like a scientific pursuit is pretty new. It's part of what's called anthrozoology, which is a study of human-animal interactions. For years, people studied either apes because they're sort of closest to us genetically, or they studied like mice because they're disposable. And so there's all the animals in between. Scientists have not paid that much attention to how they work and live together. It's only been, I'd say, the last 30 years that scientists have started spending a lot of time figuring out how dogs and people interact. And so I suspect as the years go on, we're going to take some great leaps in that knowledge. Don't know whether we're ever going to talk to them or not, but I'm also not sure that's going to be as great a day as we imagine. It reminds me of the Bud Light had a great commercial a few years ago, where a guy woke up one morning and all of a sudden he could understand his dog. And all the dog ever said was, "Sausages, sausages, sausages." That may be all they got. What else would you talk about? Yes, sir.
This is a comment in regards to Jack Reacher, who's the cat in your home.
Yes.
Blended families often work.
They do. They do. And I know cat dog families have made it took us so long just to get
The
their
dog
cat.
learned quickly.
Yeah.
They're the furry babies in your household.
When we had our first cat, Rocket, this was many years ago, we had the cat, and then we found Fred as a puppy. We just found him in the ditch out in front of our house one morning. And so Rocket very quickly trained Fred in how to behave. A couple of quick shots in the snout, got him going right away. We have considered that, but we're just happy to have our world be calm. We'd be rolling the dice for sure. So, what else? Anything else? All right. Come.
You can tell what a great storyteller Tommy is, and I follow Tommy on Substack. I subscribe to his, I never know what you call these.
It's called a newsletter.
Yeah, and if you're not familiar with Substack, it's just like a huge library of wonderful writing on all sorts of different topics, just like Tommy does. I learned about sports and music and Southern life and maybe a little politics, a little philosophy. But it introduces me to things I haven't thought about before, and then I want to know more about them. And so you can tell he's a great storyteller. He's written 2 books. He's published in all sorts of national magazines. And if you want more of him, subscribe to his newsletter on Substack. And now,
I was gonna say, I'll briefly sell myself and then I'll stop. I have this newsletter called The Writing Shed. If you just look up my name and Substack newsletter, it's easy to find. It's free to sign up. If you want to give me some money for my writing, I'm welcome to take it, but I never ask you for it. You can stay free as long as you want. I also have a podcast. For those of you who listen to podcasts, it's called SouthBound. It's through the NPR station in Charlotte, which is where my day job is. And it's just interesting conversations with interesting Southerners. So if you're interested in something like that, look me up. If you look at the SouthBound podcast, that's pretty easy to find too. And so, and then I got a book. I got 2 of them, but I got one for sale over here. I have a credit card reader, so if you have credit cards, I take that. If not, it's $20 cash. And I'll be glad to sign it and personalize them any way you want. And if you brought one that you already have, be glad to sign it too. I'll sign other people's books. Whatever you want. Thank y'all so much.
we have beautiful dog cookies for humans. They got our own bakery lady, Lunch Richardson. There's hot drinks from the Keurig. We have cold drinks. We have bakery things. So visit with one another, visit some more with Tommy and Alix. We are so grateful that they made that treacherous trip over the mountains from Charlotte in this weather. And follow Tommy on the podcast, Substack. You will find your life enriched just by knowing him better.
That's an endorsement. Thank you.
So, thank you.
Thank you.